I'm in the cabinet. I am complicit in watching him grabbing at power and kissing it. Washington isn't gonna listen to discipline dissidents. This is the difference. This kid is out. Oh my god, hey. Welcome back to another theatre review with me, MickeyJoTheatre. Now, if you're meeting me for the first time, I am a UK-based theatre critic here on social media. You may be watching this video on my theatre-themed YouTube channel. You may be listening to this on a streaming platform. Hello to you. I'm wearing a Hamilton bucket hat. I had to tell you that information because at the height of the summer, it is exceedingly warm and I regret it immediately, so I had to make this worth it. Also, it's reversible, which is fun. But I am an independent theatre critic and content creator here on social media. You can also find me on all of the other social media platforms, and today we are going to be talking all about Hamilton, specifically about the relatively new UK tour production that is currently travelling around the UK. I've been lucky enough to see this tour twice already. I saw it at the very end of last year in Manchester, and I saw it more recently in Birmingham, and I have been delighted to see it getting this huge reception all around the UK, because this is a really massive tour. If you don't know, it's a big deal for this set, for this Revolve to be touring around the UK. It's a big deal for the show to be playing these lengthy multiple-month engagements, and the UK is a really small country, and the show continues to run successfully at the Victoria Palace Theatre in the West End. So for the tour to be running concurrently with that is kind of mind-blowing, especially with so many other big shows touring at the same time. For the benefit of any Americans watching this, it's the equivalent of the Broadway production of Hamilton continuing to run at the Richard Rodgers Theatre, while a touring version played for months at a time, various cities in New Jersey and Long Island. And this may or may not be a surprise to you, because within the global musical theatre sphere, Hamilton is a huge, huge hit. It is one of the few musicals in recent decades to have truly broken through into the mainstream zeitgeist and become a cultural phenomenon all of its own. And so in today's review, as well as telling you about this UK touring production and of course the cast and their performances, I want to talk a little bit about what afforded it that initial popularity. Why has Hamilton become so successful? Why does it resonate so much with UK audiences, who by all accounts shouldn't like being depicted as the villains in this piece? And with so many other brilliant pieces of musical theatre out there, what is it about this show that has people calling it a masterpiece? Today, we are going to answer that question. If you enjoyed this review, make sure to follow me or subscribe wherever you are seeing or hearing this, and stay tuned for many more reviews coming very soon. And also, if you have seen the current UK tour of Hamilton, comment down below with all of your thoughts about it, or if you have any other thoughts about Hamilton, let us know. Let us know where you first saw the show, how many times you've seen it. Are you one of the individuals who has not yet seen Hamilton? What is keeping you from seeing the show? In the meantime, here are all of my thoughts about Hamilton. So if you don't know, let me give you a very quick history lesson about Hamilton. Created entirely by Lin Manuel Miranda, that is to say he wrote the book, the music, and the lyrics, and it's an adaptation of a biography named Alexander Hamilton, written by Ron Chernow, which understandably documents the life of American statesman, former Treasury Secretary, and Revolutionary War officer Alexander Hamilton. His being a fascinating historical life, and it takes us through a lot of the most interesting turning points of the early years of the United States. You know, we go through the whole Revolutionary War, we go through the first presidency with him working very closely with George Washington, and then his downfall as well as his remarkable rise. Having been this orphaned immigrant who survived poverty to come to the US, it really becomes this story about the American dream in many ways, which is something that resonates a lot with US audiences and goes much of the way towards explaining its Broadway success. But before we talk about the other reasons for its success, why the hell does this show work as well as it does in the UK? And we could talk about the music, which is one of the most notable features of this show because it features a score including rap and hip-hop. It's very contemporary in that way. It's very historically anachronistic for good reason. We'll talk about why. And its score gained significant mainstream popularity, earning it a lot of fans worldwide. A lot of people go to see Hamilton in London and around the UK because they have become fans of the show. But there are plenty of other people who go and see it simply because they have heard that it's meant to be very good. And that's the interesting thing when something becomes a mega hit, when it becomes hugely successful. And not for decades before had we seen something become as successful as Hamilton. We can talk about Rent in the late 90s. Prior to that, it was probably the likes of The Phantom of the Opera and Les Mis. These mega hit musicals that really break through into mainstream culture beyond our bubble of theatre people do not come along that often, and they need to be celebrated and studied. And there are definitely themes within Hamilton that transcend its historic and geographical specificity and speak to audiences universally. I don't think British people really care about the fact that King George III is the villain in Hamilton, especially because he's depicted in a very playful, tongue-in-cheek style. In fact, British audiences are hugely responsive to that part of the show. I also don't think, by and large, most British audiences are particularly enamored with a show about American history, and I think if they resonate hugely with a piece about the potential for the immigrants to be embraced by society and lead hugely successful lives, then they're sure as hell not voting like that. I do think it comes down to both this show's reputation preceding itself and it being a damn good piece of theatre that feels vital and urgent and contemporary. It's not giving you jazz hands traditional musical theatre. There's also something incredibly unpretentious about it, and that goes hand in hand with hip-hop as a genre, I feel. Now let's talk a little bit more about the general reasons why Hamilton works. And, you know, it's about the life of Alexander Hamilton, but much like a Les Mis, it's this epic story with a whole bunch of side characters swirling around him. And it takes place over years, over decades, with a lot of political machinations happening underneath, an awful lot of information to be conveyed, and a lot for us to understand. It focuses on the key events of Hamilton's life, but this man was responsible for so many incidental things, like the creation of the New York Post and the Coast Guard, that so many of these facets of his life have to just be dropped as lines in song, as sung by Aaron Burr, who, interestingly enough, is both the man that killed Hamilton. That's not a spoiler, they literally tell you in the first 5 minutes, he tells you himself, and he is also the narrator of the show. A choice straight out of Sir Andrew Lloyd Webber and Sir Tim Rice's groundbreaking rock opera Jesus Christ Superstar, where the final days of Jesus's life and his downfall, possibly on account of his own hubris, there are parallels with Hamilton there, are told by Judas Iscariot, the one who betrayed him and was responsible for his death. Having Burr narrate Hamilton almost feels like a nod to Jesus Christ Superstar, and he is the other side of this coin throughout as we follow the lives of these two men who make very different decisions because they have very different political mindsets and approaches, where Hamilton is consistently direct and open about his intentions and his aims, and goes at full pace after everything that he wants, letting nothing get in his way. Burr is a lot more reticent and reluctant and nervous about the possibility of failure. As he tells us in song, he is willing to wait for it. Much of the joy and brilliance of Hamilton is found in the tone with which it's been written by Lin Manuel Miranda. He has this enormous love for this story and this passion for it that seeps through into the writing, and there is a playfulness to it and there is a wit to it, and it's a little bit silly. For every serious historical chapter you have the likes of like Hercules Mulligan being a flower girl at the wedding and throwing some flower petals into the air. But if I had to pin down the two main factors of Hamilton's success, they are thus. The first is the casting approach, the second is the music. So the casting sees these predominantly white historical characters played by performers of colour, with the exception of King George III and a couple of other ensemble members in the UK productions. This reframes the story in a very necessary way because it's telling us about America then, but it's depicting it as America now, with a very visually different melting pot. And this is important because it transposes the historical oppression of these characters as the then underdogs and brings that about and gives it new meaning with the way that it's cast. It also relates the thing to a story about successful immigrants without having to spend too much of its time talking about that. And when something becomes so hugely successful, inevitably there is going to arise a little bit of criticism, if only for the sake of it. And the majority of the criticism I have seen of Hamilton is that it doesn't do enough to tackle the fact that many of these characters were slave owners. And it nods to it, and it, you know, Thomas Jefferson is criticised for it during one cabinet battle interaction with Alexander Hamilton, but we don't spend that much time unpacking it, and we don't spend that much time addressing it for other characters like Angelica Schuyler. However, the fact that she is portrayed by an actress of colour doesn't redeem her character, but allows that actress to take back some of the power of that characterization. There is power in that. And the music works for almost exactly the same reason, because for these characters of the time, their words and their actions would have been revolutionary and vital and urgent and pulsating. But if we were to hear all of this sung in what would have been traditional music of the time, of the late 18th century, to us it would sound traditional and classical and perhaps uninteresting. Simply put, the anachronistic use of contemporary music and hip-hop and rap allows us to interpret these historic feelings with contemporary resonance. And that carries through to the music of the rest of the show, with King George III singing in a style familiar of the Beatles, who were this British invasion boy band. It's all very appropriate. The score itself is also a melting pot of a bunch of different cultures. It contains references to classic hip-hop songs. It contains a couple of musical theatre references. There is a Gilbert and Sullivan reference in this score. There is a Jason Robert Brown reference in this score. And that is because Lin Manuel Miranda, and I mean this with nothing but love, is a history nerd and a music nerd, and that comes together to give us Hamilton. But his is not the only brilliant mind responsible for bringing about this production. Director Tommy Kail brings us this brilliant staging of the show and this fascinating playground created by set designer David Corrins, where it feels like a building ground for America. We move between battlefields, dueling grounds, government buildings, and private residences, but all the time it feels like this construction space. It feels not unlike a ship heading towards a future. And the storytelling movement of this ensemble cast, as created by Tommy Kail and co-director and choreographer Andy Blankenbuehler, is so mesmerizingly brilliant. There has been much talk of the performer in the ensemble who plays the Bullet, who is intimately involved with each moment that death is depicted within the show, even fully showing us the path of a fatal bullet during a pivotal duel. But this ensemble is brilliantly utilized to represent two different things. They represent both different groups of people. They play soldiers, and they play members of the cabinet, and they play voting citizens, and they play just the people of America. They play different communities. They also play emotions and sensations. They play urgency, and they play desperation, and they play vitality. The pace and the breadth of their choreography and movement can ultimately create senses of fear and terror and tension and chaos and comparative calm. And it's possible that I've just had so long to digest Lin Manuel Miranda's brilliant work on this show, but it's the choreography when I see the thing that I keep coming back to as, wow, that really is a work of theatrical genius. And not for nothing, but the work of music supervisor Alex Lackamore and costume designer Paul Tazewell is also brilliant. Now, there are so many things that you can say about Hamilton because the whole thing is just so rich and so detailed, and there's so much meaning in every lyric, some of which is overt, some of which is throwaway historical references, like when Jefferson says, "Sally be a lamb, won't you open this letter?" at the start of the second act, and there's so much weight of the relationship that he had with one of his slaves named Sally within that. There are so many little historical nuggets, half of which I probably don't even know about, but I'm not going to be able to unpack everything that is brilliant about Hamilton within the context of this video, and greater minds than mine have already done that. More historically and musically inclined minds have already done that. Instead, I want to tell you a few of my favourite things about the show, and we have to talk about Satisfied, because it is this incredible sequence in which the moments that have just played out, in which Hamilton has met his future wife, Elizabeth Schuyler, and they have been introduced in a meeting facilitated by her older sister, Angelica, and then become married. We see all of that happen, and then we see it all rewound and played from Angelica's perspective, which allows us to see the whole thing very differently, because she first desired Alexander Hamilton for herself, before immediately realizing, for a handful of different reasons that occurred to her at exactly the same time, that it would be better to pair him with her sister, much to her own regret. This, I think, is one of the most interesting romantic arcs in the show, because Hamilton continues to confide in Angelica politically and personally, and there's a cut song in the second act that I do miss from the material called Congratulations, which ends this arc, I think, in a more satisfying way than the show currently does. I just miss the lyric, "I languished in a loveless marriage in London, I lived only to read your letters." There's so much honesty in that, after all of the unspoken, passionate tension between them for years. But if I'm being completely honest, the cut song I most miss from the show is a reprise of the song Dear Theodosia. Now, Dear Theodosia happens in the first act after Hamilton and Burr, then sort of like political rivals, sort of, have both become fathers. And this represents a big shift in the mood of the show, and also how it speaks to two different things, and how it speaks to different generations of audiences as well, because the whole first act feels very revolutionary, very urgent. It teaches us about reclaiming power and taking the world for ourselves and rising up and daring to dream about living in freedom. But where most narratives would end at this point, Hamilton moves past that and talks a lot about legacy. This ends up being the real focus of the show. What does legacy mean? What does it mean for something to outlive you? Who lives, who dies, who tells your story? How are you remembered? And how do you deal with the lack of control over how you are remembered? Much of which has to do with having children. For these historical men, it has to do with having sons. And at this point, Hamilton has just had his first son named Philip, and Burr has just had a daughter, Theodosia, named after her mother. And there are parallels in the lyrics that these two men sing to their children while duetting together, promising to be better parents than the ones they had for themselves. They sing to their children, "You will come of age with our young nation." They're being born at the same time that America is being born anew. But there's a reprise of this that has been cut from the show when we learn in the second act that the mother of Aaron Burr's child has tragically died. There's a lyric from that song where he sings, "We bleed and fight for you. Sometimes it seems that's all we do," where you can feel all of the regret and the frustration of his position at this time. And I think that does a lot to tell us how much Burr's character has changed by that point in the show. Not only that, it sets up brilliantly the fear that he brings into this fateful duel with Alexander Hamilton, where his chief impetus as he's going into the thing is, "I will not let this man make an orphan of my daughter." And it's only at that moment in this new version of the show, or in the version of the show that ended up happening after that song was cut in development, that we find out that Theodosia Sr. has died. I also think Hamilton is one of the best musical depictions that we have of political combat, and indeed of military combat as well. I think those are the two things that the show does very well. One speaks to its brilliant staging, the other speaks to the brilliant writing. And these cabinet rap battle moments where they use handheld microphones, again, suggest to us the very personal nature of these grievances and of these debates, and they make it energizing and thrilling and dangerous. This is a writer saying, I think these historic political conflicts are just as exciting as watching a cage fight, as watching a boxing match, and I'm going to help you as the audience to understand that by using comparative language and staging. And then I think we have to give it credit as well for the agency that it affords its female characters. This is not something that you find in a lot of historic depictions. And the whole ending sequence that focuses on the work that Eliza did in the years after her husband's death in order to ensure that his legacy was preserved, as well as the legacy of those that he worked with and those that he was friends with. And that's one of the most emotionally impactful moments of the show for us as well, because finally we begin to become a part of it as well, because it invokes the idea at the very end that this entire show and this moment and this performance specifically and this audience is a part of that legacy and is a part of the impact of the work that Eliza did. That, to my mind, is why she gasps at the end, but other people have different interpretations of that moment. And those are just some of my thoughts about why Hamilton is so fantastic on stage as a piece. Let me tell you specifically about this touring production and its cast. Now I'm going to talk predominantly about the cast here because this tour is the same production as the West End, and I want to convey that with some weight here because that is not something that happens often. Normally these shows have to make a whole bunch of changes to visit these regional British theatres. I was very surprised when we found out that this was going to be touring with the Revolve, because that is not something that a lot of shows are able to do. Come From Away right now, because it's doing shorter runs, is not able to tour with its Revolve, so it has a slightly different staging. But Hamilton is giving you, by and large, and I don't know the exact dimensions of everything, nor am I enough of a super fan to tell you if there are like subtle shifts, but it is the same production from the West End, from Broadway. Actually, I say that there are two changes that they made from Broadway to UK for British audiences, if anyone is curious. One of them is that when Angelica visits in the second act and she's singing Take a Break to Alexander, who's trying to get his debt plan through Congress. In the American version, he sings Eliza, tell my wife John Adams doesn't have a real job anyway, in response to Eliza saying, Angelica, tell him John Adams spends the summer with his family. Now, this time, John Adams was the vice president. American audiences would know that, British audiences wouldn't. So he says to British audiences, Angelica, tell my wife vice president isn't a real job anyway. The other thing that British audiences may not know is where Weehawken is. So towards the end of the show, when Burr sings to Hamilton, Weehawken, dawn, guns drawn, or something to that effect. In the British version of the show, they sing New Jersey, dawn, guns drawn, I believe. Otherwise, same show. And I've seen some people saying online that they thought this production lacked a bit of energy in comparison to the West End one. And I really didn't get that. Both times that I saw it in two completely different venues, I thought that this was just as galvanizing, just as energizing, just as pulsating and vital as ever I've seen the show. And I saw the original West End cast twice. So let's talk about the performers that I enjoyed so much. Shaq Taylor is playing Alexander Hamilton. I actually think his performance has developed a lot in the 8 or so months since I first saw it. The thing he does exceptionally well is playing on the occasional childishness, and it's the moments where he makes fun of people using different voices. He does this to Burr, he does this to Jefferson. It's hysterically funny, and it's part of the real charm and wit that his Alexander Hamilton has, but he becomes very world-weary in the second act, particularly after It's Quiet Uptown. Shaq also has this brilliant stage presence and a beautiful resonance to his voice, particularly the lower range of his voice, which he doesn't get to utilize fully in this, but I've heard him singing some material before where it's just utterly gorgeous. And what's always been interesting about the show is how great a role Aaron Burr is alongside Alexander Hamilton. In fact, it's the actors playing Burr who usually win the awards. And I enjoy Sam Holliday as Burr in this production. I don't know if it's exactly to my taste, but it's a really valid interpretation of the role because he plays a lot on the naivety. I don't feel from the first to the second act that he grows quite as old as Alexander does. We aren't able to discern as much of a shift in his character over these various years, and that's where I think the missing reprise of Dear Theodosia would do a lot, actually. But where we've seen Burrs in the past sort of lurking in the background with a sort of a wisdom, he seems to be motivated almost entirely by fear and by nervousness and by a superfluity of caution. He also might be that little bit too chipper right until the turning point of the show where his presidential campaign is sort of usurped by the recommendation of Thomas Jefferson by Alexander Hamilton unexpectedly. This changes everything for Burr and suddenly transforms him into a different human being, and for that to have been foreshadowed a little more would have been great. I will say, wait for it, and The Room Where It Happens remains standout moments of the show because of his performance, because of the showmanship of it, because of the choreography, and the spiteful indifference with which he narrates the events of Hamilton's life. Very well pitched. Now let's talk about the Schuyler sisters. Maya Brito plays Eliza. I love the passion that she sings with. It is so prominent in her voice. And this is a character that really invites a strong shift from the first act to the second, because she is this very naive and hopeful young girl singing this infatuated song about her attraction to Alexander Hamilton that invokes references to pop songs like The Boy Is Mine and I'm so into you, into you, into you. And in particular, Maya plays the lowest emotional moment of Eliza's arc stunningly, which Aisha Jawando as Angelica is also very involved in. I really like Aisha's performance. I enjoy her rendition of Satisfied. It's a hell of a song to put across. I love her characterization of Eliza, but it's her performance of It's Quiet Uptown that really made me gasp the first time, because it's a bold choice. Now, Aisha was an original cast member of Tina, the Tina Turner musical, and we have seen her go full throttle on stage before. That's the first way I ever saw her as a performer. But the reservation with which she performs It's Quiet Uptown, it's almost off the voice, technically. It's so hushed and placed in such a fragile part of the range. It feels tentative, it feels anguished, it feels reserved. And this is another brilliant choice of the show, to have her as the third party narrate the parental grief of Alexander and Eliza, with the insight that she has into both of them as individuals and as a couple. The trio is completed by Gabriella Benedetti, who plays the dual roles of Peggy Schuyler and Mariah Reynolds, and gives us exactly what we need as both of those characters, which is juvenile, cutesy harmonies and lustful dangerous, belting, does a great job of both. As we begin to talk about our supporting cast, we have to mention the scene-stealing King George III, the delight of many a British audience, played as a campy pantomime villain which absolutely works, by Daniel Boyes, who has always had this fantastic tenor voice. He sounds wonderful singing this material. I love the moments in the second act where he is just gleefully, maliciously watching Hamilton's downfall from the side and dancing along in this very British way. I think this character is even more important in British productions of the show because obviously connect a lot to the audience, but in that moment specifically becomes an insert for us into the show. We're watching the unfolding of American history just as much as he was from the other side of the Atlantic. And it works in a different way because at the moment he's waiting to find out who's replacing George Washington. Chances are more American audiences will already know the president who came second. A lot of British audiences won't. Now let's talk about Hamilton's revolutionary bedfellows. K.M. Drew Boateng played Hercules Mulligan with all of the gruffness and the attack that I wanted from that character. He then becomes Madison in the second act, James Madison, which I enjoyed even more. I really liked his characterization here, so committed to Madison's eccentricities and dubious health. D'Angelo Jones plays John Lawrence and Philip Hamilton. Lawrence is a nice enough part, but it's his Philip Hamilton that is particularly charming, especially when he's playing him in his younger years, but then also with authority when he comes of age and he's defending the honor of his father. Not a great choice, but we all found that out. Charles Simmons commands enormous gravitas as George Washington, gives us really great vocals, unexpectedly great high-range vocals for this character, but also, and this is the mark of a great George Washington, the world weariness and the level-headedness to Hamilton's comparative hot-headedness. He becomes ultimately the most important political advisor and ally in Hamilton's entire life, and the bond that these two form in this production really conveys that. But there is one person I have left for last because I think he is giving the standout performance of the show. I am talking about rising theatrical star Billy Nevers. You may have seen him in *Anne Juliet, you may have seen him in Legally Blonde at Regent's Park Open Air Theatre. Billy is exceptional in this show. He also covers Aaron Burr. I don't know where I wouldn't travel in the country to go and see Billy do a Burr show if I was free to do so. He is fantastic though as Jefferson/Lafayette. The precision and the tone of his vocals is so exceptional. He's basically a male Beyonce, commands so much fantastic stage presence. It's a charming, comedic, light-hearted characterization, but he also delivers all of the political sass very well. He has a huge career ahead of him, and this is just one very exciting part of it. Go see him in this show, I beg you. And finally, I do want to salute among a very hard-working ensemble, Honey Joseph and Antoine Murray Straffen. I'm probably mispronouncing his name. I'm so sorry to you, Antoine. They are both fantastic dancers, but really mesmerizing in their execution of this choreography and infusing it with such meaning and such panache and such intention emotionally, and it's what separates them from just great dancing and makes them impossible not to watch when either of them is on stage. And so basically it is because of all of these performers that this touring production of Hamilton is so exciting. It is a huge treat to regional British audiences that it is visiting as many places as it is, and it is stopping for as long as it is. It's not going to every single theatre around the country. If you can travel somewhere to go and see Hamilton, I urge you to do so. You will not be disappointed. It is just as good as the West End. And those are my thoughts about this revolutionary show. I hope that you have enjoyed today's review. I've never really talked about Hamilton critically here on my channel before, and I enjoyed getting to unpack it a little bit, even if it is daunting to do so. And that means, now that I've shared mine, you have to as well. Please comment down below with your thoughts about this show, about this production, about these performances. I am so fascinated to see what you all thought. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching or listening to this review. I hope that you enjoyed. Make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you are seeing or hearing this. And stay tuned for many more West End, Broadway, and regional reviews coming very soon. I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day.
For 10 more seconds, I'm MickeyJoTheatre. Oh my god, hey. Thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!